Hello, and welcome to Chapter 6. In this chapter we will focus on understanding and applying the concept of internal validity to implementation research. At the end of this chapter, you will be able to explain the concept of internal validity, identify factors that improve internal validity, identify factors that threaten internal validity, and apply methods to assess the internal validity of implementation research. Let's start with a reminder of what validity means. Validity is an estimate of how accurately an instrument measures what it's supposed to, in a specific context. In other words, validity is concerned with what an instrument measures and how well it does so. There are two main types of validity: internal validity and external validity. Internal validity focuses on whether a study can show cause and effect within a specific context, while external validity looks at how well findings can apply to other groups or settings. In implementation research, internal validity is about ensuring that outcomes are truly due to the strategies being used. Researchers ensure internal validity by minimizing bias and controlling experimental conditions. This chapter explores internal validity in all stages of implementation research, from strategy design to data analysis and sharing findings. Internal validity is closely linked to concepts like bias and confounding. Bias refers to any deviation from the truth, leading to distorted results and incorrect conclusions. This can occur during data collection, analysis, interpretation, publication, or review, resulting in systematically different conclusions from reality. For instance, in a study evaluating a weight loss program for people with diabetes, focusing only on participants who complete the program may introduce bias. Dropout rates can influence the perceived success of the program, as those who drop out due to disappointment may differ from those who continue and succeed. Addressing these differences between study participants is crucial to prevent bias. On the other hand, confounding is a distortion that affects the relationship between an exposure and an outcome, because a factor is independently associated with both. For example, if sleeping under insecticide-treated nets is positively associated with low malaria rates in a community, it might be assumed that the nets are solely responsible. However, other factors like mosquito repellent or insecticide spray usage could also influence malaria rates, creating a potentially misleading association. In essence, while bias generates untrue associations, confounding describes true associations in a potentially deceptive manner. Let's move on to discuss validity in assessment tools. Having valid tools is crucial for scientific progress because they enable accurate collection, expression, and comparison of observation and experiment results. In implementation research, psychometric validation of tools is especially important. Low-quality tools have hindered the discovery and application of evidence-based implementation strategies for widespread delivery of evidence-informed interventions. Without validated tools, confidence in study findings and interpretations, as well as assessing implementation fidelity, is compromised. Validity assessment determines how suitable and useful an instrument is for a specific setting or interpretation. Valid measures of implementation outcomes are essential for monitoring and evaluating implementation success and comparing different strategies. Key aspects of instrument validity include construct validity, assessing how well an assessment measures the intended construct. For example, a tool evaluating the feasibility of an intervention in different communities should accurately identify which community finds the intervention more feasible. Face validity, evaluating whether, at face value, an instrument seems to measure the intended construct. Structural validity, determining if the survey tool assesses a construct as unidimensional or multidimensional. In summary, even when replication studies follow rigorous statistical practices, if there's no evidence of construct validity for the measures being studied, the results lack meaning. For instance, when assessing implementation outcomes like acceptability for vaccine acceptance in communities, it's vital to ensure that the instrument used has construct, face, and structural validity. Let's talk a bit about quantitative factors that improve internal validity. In this section, we explain the various quantitative factors that must be observed to improve the internal validity of implementation research. In quantitative implementation research, improving internal validity involves specific strategies. These include blinding or masking, which means ensuring that everyone involved in the study, including participants, researchers, and data collectors, remains unaware of which treatment each participant receives. The suitability of blinding depends on factors like the type of outcome being examined. For instance, when testing the effectiveness of an implementation strategy like using financial incentives to reduce vaccine hesitancy in communities A and B, steps are taken to ensure that neither participants nor researchers know which community is receiving the incentives. Random selection and randomization. This method offers benefits such as safeguarding against confounding factors and providing internal estimates of variability for statistical inference. For example, when evaluating the effectiveness of an implementation strategy, like using financial incentives to reduce vaccine hesitancy in a community, it's essential to randomly select community members and assign them randomly to receive or not receive incentives. Failing to do so could result in one group having a sample with higher socioeconomic status, which might influence their vaccine hesitancy. Experimental manipulation refers to purposefully changing independent variables in experimental research designs to observe outcomes related to implementation, services, or clients. However, the effectiveness of these manipulations depends on their construct validity, meaning they should genuinely affect the processes they are intended to influence. For instance, to assess the sustainability of an implementation strategy for increasing HIV testing in family planning, clinics can be randomly assigned to provide either the intervention or standard care. This manipulation helps evaluate outcomes under different conditions. Strict study protocols outline how research will be conducted before it begins. They standardize the research process, reduce subjectivity, and include reliable, valid measures to advance implementation research. Protocols ensure a stakeholder-driven approach to defining measures and establish criteria for assessing research strategies and outcomes. For example, before conducting implementation research, researchers must submit a protocol and obtain ethical clearance from an institutional review board to address ethical concerns and ensure adherence to the protocol. Let's take a moment to talk about implementation research that uses qualitative methods to improve internal validity. The following approaches can help ensure internal validity. Prolonged involvement. This involves the researcher spending a significant amount of time in the study, engaging with the community and participants. For instance, researchers may belong to the community being studied, or have an extended study duration. Negative case selection. This method involves actively seeking and explaining outliers, negative cases, in the data during analysis, expanding the interpretation of the findings. Triangulation involves using multiple data collection instruments, methods, such as mixed methods, and theories to cross-validate findings and perspectives. Peer debriefing. In this approach, a peer reviewer critically evaluates the study procedures, meanings, interpretations, and conclusions, acting as a devil's advocate. Member checking entails systematic feedback from participants on collected data, categories, interpretations, and conclusions to ensure credibility. Audit trail refers to keeping a detailed record of all research-related activities and data, including interviews, recordings, and researcher diaries, and helps maintain transparency and accountability. It's important to understand that factors improving internal validity might also harm external validity. Randomization, for instance, has raised community concerns due to past research abuses, leading to mistrust. Sometimes, it's impractical, expensive, or unethical to use randomization, especially in community-based or policy interventions where withholding programs could raise ethical issues. In some cases, sacrificing some internal validity, for better external validity, may be acceptable, especially when there's existing experimental evidence to reference. Ideally, researchers aim for both strong internal and external validity, as they can complement each other in quasi-experimental studies. Once internal validity is confirmed, researchers assess external validity by considering if the results apply to similar populations in different settings. Without internal validity, drawing conclusions from a study is unreliable, making external validity irrelevant. To boost internal validity, researchers need meticulous planning, quality control processes, proper recruitment methods, data collection, analysis, and sample size. However, prioritizing internal validity over external validity isn't enough to create effective programs or policies that work across diverse or resource-limited settings. Let's start with factors that threaten internal validity. In this section, we discuss factors that can undermine the internal validity of implementation research. These factors include history, maturation, testing, instrument decay, diffusion, selection, and mortality. History refers to events, unrelated to the study treatment, that may occur between pre-test and post-test observations, potentially distorting the treatment effect. For instance, in hospitals, history may involve patient transfers, staff changes, symptom changes, or adverse treatment events. Maturation involves natural changes over time in participants, such as aging, hunger, fatigue, or gaining wisdom, which could falsely appear as a treatment effect or hide a real one. It also encompasses biological changes like wound healing, recovery from surgery, or disease progression. Repeated testing with the same measures can influence outcomes. Physiological measures, like blood pressure or psychological tests, can show improvement as participants become more familiar with the tests, affecting outcomes significantly. Instrument decay refers to the weakening or loss of accuracy of tools used to measure variables in a study. For instance, if a researcher uses a battery-powered device to measure blood pressure in a study testing a drug's effectiveness in reducing hypertension, the device may gradually lose accuracy over time due to battery depletion. In such cases, it's crucial to plan the experiment so the researcher can measure participants' blood pressure before a pre-test and after a post-test. They take the drug for 1 month. Diffusion occurs when the results of one group affect another group through interaction or observation. This can also lead to resentful demoralization, where the control group puts in less effort due to feeling resentful toward the other group. Selection bias, or simply selection, arises from potential biases in choosing participants for experimental and control groups, resulting in non-equivalent groups. This bias can occur subtly, even if participants don't directly choose their groups. Mortality, or experimental mortality, refers to the uneven loss of participants from experimental and control groups, often known as dropout or attrition. Experimental procedures typically demand more commitment, leading to higher dropout rates in the experimental group. If less committed individuals drop out, it can falsely suggest greater benefits from the intervention. Let's now look at the methods used for assessing internal validity in implementation research. Various methods or tools exist for assessing internal validity in research. The choice of method depends on whether the study uses qualitative, quantitative, or randomized trial designs. For qualitative studies, tools like the Consolidated Criteria for Reporting Qualitative Research, COREQ, checklist are used to ensure thorough reporting of interviews and focus group discussions. Quantitative studies utilize guidelines, such as the Strengthening the Reporting of Observational Studies in Epidemiology, STROBE, statement, to improve reporting quality. Randomized trials adhere to guidelines like the Consort statement, providing standards for reporting parallel group randomized trials. Because existing guidelines cover various research types, but don't fully address reporting standards for implementation research, the Standards for Reporting Implementation Studies, STARI, checklist was developed to bridge the gap. Primarily focuses on reporting standards for studies evaluating implementation strategies aimed at improving the adoption, implementation, and sustainability of interventions. Some items in the checklist may also apply to other study designs used in implementation research. Unlike most reporting guidelines specific to certain methodologies, STAR is applicable to a wide range of study designs used in implementation research. The STAR checklist consists of 27 items and revolves around two main strands, describing the methods used to promote implementation and the intervention being implemented. For a detailed description and explanation of the STAR checklist, visit the Equator Network website. Let's recap on what we have learnt in this chapter. Internal validity ensures that at the end of conducting an implementation research study, we can attribute the success of our implementation, services, and client outcomes, and ultimately the effectiveness of the evidence-informed intervention, to the effectiveness of the implementation strategies. Depending on the research method used, quantitative or qualitative, it is important to ensure that specific methods are used to improve the internal validity of your implementation research. The internal validity of implementation research will be significantly compromised if measures are not put in place to avoid situations where it would be difficult to confidently conclude that changes in our implementation, services, and client outcomes are due to our implementation strategies. To avoid threats to the internal validity of implementation research, it is important to use a checklist, such as the Standards for Reporting Implementation Studies, STARI, checklist, to guide implementation research studies. That's it for Chapter 6, but before you go, take a moment to consolidate what you have learnt by putting it into practice. Download this chapter's supporting resource material and complete the activity there. Once you have completed the activity, please join us for Chapter 7, where we will look at external validity in more detail.